Ahoy there, my children of the Force. How the hell are you all doing today? Your boy Dan. We got another excellent week of Q&A questions to dive into. I'm very excited to dive into this week's Q&A because there were some really fun questions that I got that I was really excited to talk about with all of you guys. Also, you guys get to see my nerd ass. I leveled up this week and figured since this is going to be a regular thing, might as well start showing my ugly mug for you jabronis. So, with that said, as I mentioned, we got a lot of really cool questions to dive into today. I had a lot of fun working on these questions, researching some of the questions, because there's some in here that I had a good idea of how I would want to answer it, but there was a couple in here that was like, you know what, I need to brush up on a few things. So it was a lot of fun to be able to research some stuff and to dive into these questions. And then for our final question, I've got a fun one that at least I am going to enjoy. Whether or not you guys are going to enjoy it, that's another question. So make sure to hang out until the end. This way, you get to listen to me blabber on. All right. So to start us off, for our first question, Aim Infinity and a slew of other people, a bunch of people ask, why do the Sith use lightsabers? So this question was asked by a bunch of people in a recent video that I dropped discussing why the lightsaber is the only choice of weapon for the Jedi. A bunch of people asked this question in the comments of that video, so I figured, hey, why not talk about this in the Q&A so I could share my thoughts with you guys, and then we could have a discussion about it and give me your thoughts on why you think the Sith use lightsabers. Now, before I answer this question, if you have not watched that video yet, you jabroni, what the hell are you doing? Watch that video. It's a short. It's like 40 seconds long, 50 seconds long. So you have no excuse to not watch it. So go and watch it if you haven't. But in my video, I discussed how Obi-Wan was explaining to Anakin, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 22 BBY is when these two are having this discussion. It's taking place in Coruscant, the Jedi Temple. Anakin and Obi-Wan, they're sparring, so they're training with one another. And this comes from Charles Soule's main Star Wars comic series. I've mentioned this comic series several times in recent live streams, and if you haven't read it before, I would highly recommend it because it's a really, really great comic. I love Charles Soule. He's an excellent writer, and I really like how he talks about the Jedi and the Force, and I felt like his explanation of why the Jedi solely use lightsabers is really good. And this comes from issue 25 of that comic series, so I would definitely recommend it. So in a nutshell, as Obi-Wan and Anakin are sparring, Obi-Wan told Anakin that rather than the Jedi use weapons like kyber blasters, which they do have, by the way, in the Bogan collection. I believe it's in the Bogan collection, from Charles Soule's Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, another comic I've talked about a bunch of times in live streams. Jocasta Nu uses a kyber blaster that is powered by a lightsaber, essentially. It's freaking awesome. So the Jedi do have that kind of weaponry. And Obi-Wan is talking about in the comic how at one point he designed essentially lightsaber nunchucks, and Qui-Gon was like, yo, you're tripping, man. But he explains to Anakin that the lightsaber was the only weapon of choice for the Jedi due to how the Jedi wish to be seen across the galaxy and how that ties into the central mission of the Jedi Order. The Jedi believe that the lightsaber symbolized the care and approach that they take in wielding their Force powers, and that every injury or death that it inflicts must be precisely chosen signifying to the galaxy that the Jedi are protectors rather than destroyers. And as I mentioned earlier, I love this explanation. I love how Charles Soule breaks it down and how he shows Obi-Wan explaining this to Anakin. I think it's so great. And again, it highlights the idea that the Jedi are supposed to be protectors. The Jedi are supposed to protect life. They're supposed to be defenders of peace and justice. They're not supposed to be soldiers. They're not supposed to be violent. So they are going to use a weapon that is going to help with the defense of the galaxy, help with the defense of everyday citizens, as opposed to using weapons of destruction or weapons for offense like a kyber blaster or lightsaber nunchucks like Obi-Wan created. And Obi-Wan and Anakin, as they're speaking to one another, Anakin asks him, well, hey, bro, we use lightsabers. I get the point you're making here, but why do the Sith also use lightsabers then? What's up with that? And although Obi-Wan thought that the Sith would basically, their reasons for using a lightsaber, they use lightsabers because they think that anything the Jedi can do, the Sith can do better. Give me 1 second here, fellas. I just realized, fellas and ladies, we're going to move something really quickly. I just realized we're going to move it to like right. How about this? We're going to go over here. I think that's better. I just realized the damn little like SWT thumbnail is right over my face. So that no go there. All right. Sorry about that. Let's get back to it. So Anakin is like, bro, why do the Sith use lightsabers? And Obi-Wan's thought is that the Sith think that, hey, everything the Jedi can do, we can do just as good and we could do it better. And I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure that the Sith would tell you the same thing, that, hey, whatever the Jedi can do, we are stronger. We could absolutely do anything the Jedi can do, and we could do it way better. But using lightsabers makes a lot of sense when you think about it, even for the Sith. In a galaxy where the Sith's main opponents, even though, right, let's say they're still in hiding at this point, before Sidious takes over the galaxy, they're still in hiding. Even when they're operating in the shadows, their main opponents are going to be people using blasters, maybe some melee weapons. And if they run into any Jedi, possibly using a lightsaber, right? So if they're going up against some jabroni in the bowels of Coruscant, let's say, and that jabroni's using a blaster, the Sith could easily defend themselves with a lightsaber and they could cut that opponent down. Likewise, again, if they're going up against a Jedi, it would make sense that they would be able to defend themselves with a lightsaber, considering that's what the Jedi are going to be using. So it makes sense for the Sith to also use a lightsaber just like the Jedi would be using. You can make the argument that a slug thrower could be a better option to use against a Jedi rather than using a lightsaber. But I don't think so. Essentially, a slug thrower, if you're not familiar, is pretty much a real-world gun. Our homegirl, Aura Singh, you see this blaster rifle that she's got right there. That's a cycler rifle. That's basically just a sniper rifle. It's like a real-world sniper rifle. So they shoot slugs. They shoot bullets. And if I've got a slug thrower and I'm going up against a Jedi, I fire that slug thrower. When that bullet comes out, if the Jedi goes to deflect that bullet, it's going to go through their light. It's going to hit their lightsaber, and then it's going to become molten lead or molten steel, whatever the freaking slugs are made out of. And it's not going to deflect off of the lightsaber like a blaster would. That's a decent weapon to use against a Jedi or maybe a Sith. In Darth Vader, it's also Charles Soule's Darth Vader, so it's in the Dark Lords of the Sith run. It's from 2017. So in that series, Tarkin actually hunts Darth Vader. Darth Vader basically at that point in the comic is like, bro, I've got no competition left. I have killed most of the Jedi that evaded Order 66. We know that there are some Jedi around, but for the most part, the Jedi have become extinct. So I've got no one to test my mettle against. I have no competition. Tarkin, I want you to hunt me. And so Tarkin enlists a crew of like bounty hunters. Tarkin and his gang go to a planet called Chandar's Folly, and they hunt Vader. And during their hunt, they're using slug throwers and flamethrowers. It's such a great issue. Is it number 18 or 17? I can't remember the exact. It might actually be the latter portion of the comic run. It might be in the 20s. It's great. You see in part of the issue, you see Darth Vader kind of getting lumped up a little bit by this group of bounty hunters, but of course it's Darth Vader, and he winds up killing the vast majority of them. So yeah, you could use a slug thrower against a Jedi or against a Sith, but ultimately the lightsaber is going to be your best bet. And as I mentioned, most of the Sith's opponents are going to be people wielding blasters, melee weapons, and in the rare occasion, a lightsaber. And a lightsaber is going to be the best option for the Sith. Now, if a Sith uses their lightsaber, they run the risk prior to Order 66 and the toppling of the Jedi and the Republic, they run the risk of essentially making the Jedi, the Republic, aware of their presence, because a red lightsaber is going to be very noticeable to people throughout the galaxy, and people are going to know, bro, that guy wielding or that girl wielding a freaking red lightsaber, they're probably a Sith. So there is using a lightsaber can be problematic for a Sith, but again, I still think it's going to be the best option for them. And to be clear, the Sith also didn't just solely rely on lightsabers. They used all sorts of weapons. And many of the Sith super weapons, in fact, were powered by kyber crystals. So the Death Star, obviously that's probably the most obvious option, was powered by kyber crystals. But also the super weapon on Malachor 5, that was created by Darth Tanis in 3966 BBY, so almost 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. We saw this super weapon in Star Wars Rebels. Oh, I love this episode of Star Wars Rebels. I love this season. Season 2 is so good. But in that 2-episode arc, Ahsoka, Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger, they go to Malachor 5 because Yoda told them the answers to defeating the Sith are on Malachor. So they go to Malachor 5. While they're there, they find this Sith temple. Initially, they think it's a Sith temple. And then throughout the arc, they realize, holy crap, this is a weapon. It's a super weapon. And as I mentioned, Darth Tanis was the Sith Lord that created this super weapon back in 3966 BBY. So with that said, once Darth Bane wound up creating the Rule of Two, as I mentioned, Sith using their lightsabers became problematic because they could easily be identified. But still, using a lightsaber is probably going to be the best bet for them. Now, going back to the issue that I mentioned before, the Charles Soule's Star Wars issue 25. So the beginning of that issue opens with Obi-Wan and Anakin sparring, and Obi-Wan giving the explanation to Anakin about why the Jedi use lightsabers. But then the very next short story, we'll say, in the issue is a scene that takes place in 19 BBY, so about 3 years after Obi-Wan and Anakin scene, where Darth Sidious and Darth Vader are dueling. I love issue 25 of Charles Soule's Star Wars comic is so good. Can't recommend it enough. Reading these two stories back to back is so freaking dope. I would highly, highly recommend it. So in the issue, we get this scene where Sidious and Vader, they're dueling in what's called the Works District in Coruscant. We've seen the Works a bunch in the Clone Wars. We saw it in Attack of the Clones when Dooku, after the Battle of Geonosis, he goes to Coruscant, and that's where he meets Sidious. I'm trying to think, do we see the Works District in Revenge of the Sith? I think so. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, the Works District is basically this like rundown industrial part of Coruscant. And so Sidious and Vader are sparring there. And during their duel, Sidious easily disarms Vader, and he winds up chiding Vader and tells him, bro, you're fighting like a Jedi. You're fighting as if your lightsaber is your only weapon. And according to Sidious, make this a little bit bigger. According to Sidious, the Sith's weapon is not a lightsaber, but rather the dark side, since the dark side touches everything. And Sidious's point is, bro, anything that the dark side touches, you could use that as an instrument to kill someone, which I love. Because again, think about what I was saying Obi-Wan is telling Anakin in the previous scene in that comic issue. Obi-Wan's telling Anakin, hey, we only use a lightsaber because it basically it says to the galaxy, we are here to protect people. We are here to protect life. That's what the Jedi are all about, right? Protecting life. Where Sidious is like, yo, fuck that. We will crush anything and everyone that stands in opposition to us, and we will use any means at our disposal. We will use the dark side and everything the dark side touches to destroy anyone in our way. I absolutely freaking love that. I think that is just so, it just shows you how, and I love that his name is Sidious for this reason, how insidious Darth Sidious is, and just how evil he is, and how evil the Sith are, and how ruthless they can be. I love it. And as Vader is as Sidious is explaining this to Vader, one of the things he tells Vader is, okay, we could use a lightsaber, but the lightsaber is merely a symbol signifying the great blaze of the dark side, and that it consumes all who comes against it. So essentially, Sidious is telling Vader that, bro, a lightsaber is basically a symbol to the galaxy that, bro, step to us, you are going to get the people's elbow. You're going to get smacked down. Which again, think about in opposition to what Obi-Wan is telling Anakin, complete opposite, right? The Jedi use a lightsaber to defend life. And again, Sidious is telling Vader, we will just absolutely destroy everyone who stand in our way. With our lightsaber, with the Force, doesn't matter. And I love, let me go, I want to show you guys. Scroll ahead. So I'm just gonna move this over so you could see this. Right, so again, just talking about, this is a shot from that issue 25, right? Again, the Jedi are all about defending life, protecting life, and just how different that is from the Sith. And I love this too, because when you think about how Obi-Wan is training Anakin, telling him, hey, you got to use only a lightsaber to protect life. And then fast forward 3 years, and Sidious is telling Vader, you will use everything at your disposal to kill your opponents. Use your Force powers to snuff out life if you have to. It's great because you then think about moments where we see Vader using the Force to hurl objects at his opponents, like, for instance, Luke in Empire Strikes Back. So I love it. I love that we get to see in that issue the difference in beliefs between the Jedi and the Sith and how they operate. I love hearing Sidious's explanation of the lightsabers. Let's go back to that shot. It's over a little. Right, the Sith's weapon is not the lightsaber, it's the dark side and everything that it touches. Love that. It's such a great line. And again, I think the Sith use lightsabers in part. I think it's an FU to Jedi. I do. I think it's a, hey, we could, just like you guys use lightsabers, we're going to use a lightsaber and we're going to do it better than you can. But I also think it's practical. It makes sense. Their opponents, again, are going to be wielding blasters, melee weapons, so using a lightsaber is going to be very advantageous in those situations. But then in the off chance, or in situations where they do run into a Jedi during the Rule of Two era, when they're still in hiding, they would need to be able to defend themselves, even if igniting their lightsaber could potentially inform people that, hey, this is a Sith Lord that we're dealing with. So I just think it comes down to practicality and basically a big FU to the Jedi. I think that in a nutshell, that's what it is. But I want to know what your thoughts are. What do you guys think is the reason that the Sith use lightsabers? So let me know in the comments why you think the Sith use lightsabers, because I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So in conclusion, one final thing. Not only do I think it's dope that the Sith use lightsabers, I know some people are not the biggest fan of the use of super weapons in Star Wars. I like them. I love them. I think especially like Charles Soule has Darth Momin. He had Darth Momin use a super weapon, although it wasn't powered by kyber crystals. I love the use of the super weapon on Malachor and Rebels. I think when done correctly, when it's not trying to be just a straight ripoff of the Death Star, I think super weapons can be really cool. I know that's not everyone's jam. Some people aren't a fan of them, but I think super weapons are cool, and I think it very much is in line with the beliefs and the ideology of the Sith, that again, they'll do whatever it takes to obtain power and then maintain that power. So I think super weapons in a galaxy where there's the technology to create super weapons, I think it makes a lot of sense. All right. Let's quickly see if I can find some good questions or comments before we move on to our next question. Bull Run, welcome to the chat, my man. Glad to see you're here. Praying for Damar Hamlin. Yo, I am not a Bills fan at all, but sucks so much watching what happened to that dude. Hope he's okay. For any of you other folks that are football fans. Let's see, not to be a Debbie Downer, but even so, no, we're gonna skip that. All right, I'm not finding a specific question, so we're gonna move on. Go to our next question. Do you think Star Wars Visions is good or not? So Neighbor asks, do you think Star Wars Visions is good or not? Absolutely. I love Star Wars Visions. I freaking love Star Wars Visions, guys. I really, really liked it a lot. I've been a fan of anime probably since I was in like middle school. I remember I was in like somewhere between 6th and 8th grade. A buddy of mine, his older brother, had a copy of Ninja Scroll. Haven't watched that since middle school. I vaguely remember the story, but I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And we weren't supposed to be watching it either. We weren't allowed to watch it. So that's probably why I even enjoyed it even more. But since that point, I've been a fan of anime, and I still really like anime. I watch anime to this day. So when it was announced we were getting an anime Star Wars series, I was super, super excited. I was very excited. I will say, before season 1 was released, though, I was kind of skeptical, and my excitement was tempered. I don't want to say skeptical. That might not be the best term. My excitement was tempered, we'll say, to some extent, because it came out that Visions was not going to be canon. So the stories being told in Star Wars Vision would have no ramifications, no basis, no impact with the current canon timeline. So they were going to be completely non-canon stories. Because of that, whether it was right or wrong, that kind of hampered my excitement to some extent for Visions. Kind of made me feel like, hey, this project, I don't really know if I care about it as much, or don't need to pay attention to it as much as I would have. And that was a very wrong sentiment to have with Visions, because once season 1 dropped, I was all about Visions, and I'm still all about Visions. I've mentioned Visions multiple times in my live streams, how much I enjoyed it. While those stories aren't canon, I think they're great. And we see a lot of familiar themes in Visions that we see throughout Star Wars, right? So we get concepts that we know and love, like the Force, the Jedi, the Sith, starships, hyperspace, right? All the regular stuff that we think of when it comes to Star Wars stories, they're just not canon. And they're told through an anime lens. And I loved everything about season 1. I loved the art. I loved the stories. I loved the feel. I love that each episode had its own look, its own style and story, and they all felt very unique. They didn't feel the same, but they also felt very familiar, right? I feel like when I watch season 1, it's still, even though these stories are different and they're not canon, it still feels very much like, hey, there are definitely aspects of these stories, or maybe even whole episodes, that could be very much included in the current canon timeline, which is so dope. It was very fun for me. It was very exciting. It had moments that were action-packed and dope as hell. So it made for a very fun and enjoyable overall experience for me. And I also think it's cool that it's no secret that George Lucas, when he was creating and writing Star Wars, he was very much inspired by films by creators like Akira Kurosawa and Japanese samurai films, right? So seeing Star Wars through an anime lens, knowing that, it just felt very right to me. It felt very appropriate and fitting to say, hey, Japanese films, samurai films, those are what helped inspire Star Wars, and getting to see Star Wars stories told through an anime lens. Again, it felt very, very fitting for me. The first episode of season 1, The Duel, love that episode. Surprisingly, that when season 1 was announced and we started to get the trailer and images for season 1 before it dropped, I was like, yo, The Duel is hands down going to be my favorite episode. Just the look of the art, the fact that it was straight up called The Duel, and you're getting a duel with a Sith character. I was like, that's going to be my favorite episode. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, as much as I love that episode, it wound up not being my favorite one. But I knew right after I watched episode 1, I was like, holy crap, we are in for a freaking ride, because if that's the first episode, bro, hell yeah. And it just, from there, it just winds up getting better and better for the most part. There are a couple of episodes. There's 2 episodes that I can live without. They're not my favorite. But after episode 1, I felt like the episodes just kept getting stronger and stronger for the most part. I love, so this character right here, their name is Koyuru, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, because I found that out from the Ronin book that came out. It came out, I think, in the fall, maybe? Or was it in the summer? I can't remember when it came out. But it basically tells the story of the Ronin, who is this guy right here. After their duel, the first chapter is actually their duel that we see in visions, and then it takes place after the remainder of the story takes place after their duel. So that's how I learned this character's name. I love this character. Koyuru is freaking awesome. I love her lightsaber. She takes the cake for coolest lightsaber design in all of Star Wars. And I know it's, again, not a canon lightsaber, but still, I mean, an umbrella-esque looking lightsaber that can deflect blaster bolts and look menacing as hell while still being able to operate like a normal lightsaber is just so freaking cool. I love it. It is so dope. And then from there, as I mentioned, the episodes just keep getting dope and more dope. The twins, I thought, was such a fun take on Luke and Leia, because basically it's supposed to be Luke and Leia's story retold in a different galaxy or a different universe, so to speak. And I have to give a shout out to the studio that created the twins. The studio's name is Trigger. That studio also made Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which is it's one of, I don't want to say it's my favorite show to come out in 2022. It's one of my favorite shows to come out in 2022. It was freaking fantastic. So I got to give a shout out to Trigger for not only making the twins, but also making Cyberpunk, which is so dope. If you're an anime fan, go watch that. It's on Netflix. It's spectacular. The following episode, The Village Bride. Oh, love The Village Bride. I absolutely love the animation of that episode. I love there's very much a theme of like harmony with nature, which I thought was really great. I love the music in the episode. It was just a spectacular episode from start to finish. It was great. I've mentioned The Ninth Jedi. I feel like it's almost weekly at this point with my live streams, how much I love The Ninth Jedi, how great that episode was. I'd be all for Lucasfilm creating a series or movies or comics or books set in the time period, I should say, that The Ninth Jedi takes place in, because The Ninth Jedi takes place at some point where the Sith are in abundance. They are controlling the galaxy at this point. The Jedi are near extinct, and one Jedi Master is trying to rebuild the Jedi Order and to fight the Sith Empire. And I like it because it's not just, hey, one Sith Lord has taken over the galaxy. It's, bro, there is a Sith, there is an Empire, and there is an abundance of Sith. There is a bunch of Sith at this time period. I feel like it would make for such a cool story. And just the story in The Ninth Jedi was great. Juro, Margrave Juro, is like one of the coolest looking characters in all of Star Wars, bar none. And I love the fact that he's a Jedi. I've mentioned this on here before. Danielle has heard me say this so many times. If I could choose, if I could be in the Star Wars galaxy, I would be a Jedi that dresses like a Sith, that would have a Sith looking outfit. And to me, that's what Margrave Juro is. He's a badass badass Jedi that dresses like an absolute badass and looks menacing. Absolutely love it. And his lightsaber is so freaking dope. So yeah, sign me up for The Ninth Jedi. I would be all about seeing more of that story and seeing a continuation of it. And I love in that story how one of the things I absolutely love in that story is if you watch that episode, all the characters that are supposed to look like good guys or Jedi for the most part wind up being evil. All the supposed Jedi that are waiting with our boy, I think his name is Ethan, are waiting with Ethan to meet Margrave Juro. They look very much like Jedi. Like this guy here, this dude looks very much like a do-gooder. He's a Sith in disguise, right? And it's not until is her name Kara? Can't remember her name right now. I think it's Kara. Once Kara arrives and hands out the lightsabers, because the kyber crystals are basically attuned to the emotions of the people wielding the lightsaber, they turn red, and then you see, oh, bro, these people are all Sith. They're all bad guys. I love that. I love that idea that, hey, we're going to subvert your notion of what a good guy and a bad guy looks like. Just everything about The Ninth Jedi is so dope. I can't recommend that episode enough. If there's only one episode you're going to watch, I would recommend The Ninth Jedi. Gotta talk about freaking The Elder, because man, what a dope episode. And this is one of those episodes, as I was mentioning earlier, I feel like you could take this episode and pluck its content and its story and dump it right into canon, and it would fit right in the current canon without any issue. It's basically just this guy, Sith master, on a planet, and the Jedi discover him, and we get a badass fight between a Jedi master, a Jedi apprentice, and the Sith master. And yo, we got to pour one out for my boy Dan, the Padawan. When I watched this episode and we learned that this dude's name is Dan, I was like fist pumping, man. I was so pumped. The youngling in me was so happy. I was like, dude, if I was watching this as a little kid, Dan would be my favorite Jedi. I would be so damn excited. Our homeboy gets killed, so we got to pour one out for him. Sadly. Lapin Ocho, another episode that is spectacular. I love watching that episode because it really it reminds me of watching like a Studio Ghibli anime, which I really enjoy. I mean, that studio is iconic for anime, and you know, seeing that type of animation style that we get in Lapin Ocho was just really fun. It was really gorgeous. And the last episode, Akakiri, is kind of funny, kind of quirky, but also badass. The ending of it is pretty dark. Character winds up getting killed. This woman winds up getting killed, and this Jedi that's in love with her, basically to save her life, joins up with this Sith. And I was not expecting that at all. And it's just so dope. Not Lapin Ocho, Tatooine Rhapsody, what is it? TOB1, I think is the name of the episode. Those ones weren't really my favorite. They were okay. But other than that, it is just a spectacular season. And ironically, one of the things that I loved about Visions so much after the fact, after watching season 1, was that it was not handcuffed by the confines of canon. That the storytellers were free to tell whatever story they wanted, however they wanted to tell it, without having to make sure that it adhered to the current canon timeline. And as much as I love making sure that stories fit within the canon, and we're not having retcons, and we're not having things that contradict one another in canon, it was really cool to just say, yo, for I think it's 10 episodes, I don't have to give a crap about whether or not this stuff is contradicting anything in canon, or whether there's retcons, or how things are gonna jive with one another in the canon. I'm just enjoying these really cool and fun Star Wars stories that are anime. They're not canon, but they're super fun. Danielle and I have talked about this probably ad nauseum at this point, but I'm almost jealous to some extent of fans of the MCU, because I don't want to say it's a cop out, but man, could you imagine the freedom Star Wars would have it if, bro, there's infinite amounts of timelines that we can have in canon. And MCU writers, they have that. That's not the case in Star Wars, right? We have a very linear timeline that Lucasfilm wants to adhere to with the canon. And right now, and I understand their trepidation for not wanting to fully go past where the sequel series ends, not wanting to go into the past before the Skywalker saga begins, because there's a lot of, I don't want to say baggage, that's not the right word, but there's a lot of emotions that people have with characters and stories that take place prior to the events of the Skywalker saga and after the events of the Skywalker saga, right? So it can be limiting at times for Lucasfilm and the stories that they want to tell. So the fact that Visions doesn't have to worry about that is dope. And I cannot freaking wait for season 2. I think it's coming out in the spring. If I remember correctly, I think it's coming out this spring. And I can't wait for season 2. I'm like so pumped. I would be very excited if we find out that we're going to start getting canon anime stories, and that these stories are going to explore certain characters, certain timelines. I would love to see the High Republic be featured in Visions. Let me go back. I think the episode The Elder, it could very easily take place during the High Republic, because it mentions the Jedi Master. Oh, what's his name? Master Tajin is his name. He is speaking to his Padawan Dan, and he's telling Dan that the Sith have been extinct for hundreds of years. In the prequels, in the Phantom Menace, Mace and the Jedi High Council are telling Qui-Gon, bro, there's no way you encountered a Sith Lord. The Sith have been extinct for a millennia. The High Republic takes place, 200 years? 180? I can't remember the exact amount of time prior to the Phantom Menace. And then now phase 2 is like 150 years even before then. So you could very much make a case that, hey, this story could take place during the High Republic era, which would be great. And I would love to finally see the High Republic in some sort of on-screen media outside of comics and novels. That would be dope. So yeah, I'm very excited for season 2 of Visions. What I'm thinking, I don't know if this is correct. What I think is going to happen is the Bad Batch is dropping tomorrow. The final episode is going to premiere, I think, in like the middle or end of March. And then I think sometime after that, we're going to, fairly soon after that, we're going to get Visions. I don't think a specific premiere date has been announced. We haven't gotten the trailer for it yet either for season 2, but that would be dope if it like April, May. My birthday's May 3rd, so maybe May 4th. That would be dope. We get a Star Wars Day drop of Star Wars Visions. That'd be a great birthday present for your boy Dan. I would be all about it. So yeah, let's get weird with Star Wars. That's one of the things that makes me love Star Wars comics so much, is that the comics are a space for writers and authors to get weird with Star Wars. I love that. Let's get weird with Star Wars. And I feel like Visions is a really great space for storytellers to get weird with Star Wars, since it's not going to be canon. So yeah, I'm all about it. Sign me up. Can't wait for season 2 of Visions. All right. Before we move on to our next question, see if we got any questions. Praying for Damar Hamlin says, I loved Ronin. The book is divisive, but the rest was so-so. So the book was fun. there were definitely times where I'm like, I don't know how much I'm enjoying this. And then there are definitely times where I'm like, okay, this is cool. I think it could have been maybe a little bit shorter, but for the most part, I did enjoy it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you like the duel and if you like anime. It's definitely got a very anime-like story. So I'd recommend it if you are into anime. It's a decent novel to read. And it was fairly quick. It was an easy read. All right, let's move on to our next question from Laxa Jenna, who asks, how many midichlorians does Mace Windu, Plo Koon, and Ahsoka Tano have? I searched a bunch. I tried to research this as much as I could, and I couldn't find any official canon answer to this question. I couldn't find anything in canon that specifically states, here's how many midichlorians Mace has, here's how many midichlorians Plo Koon has, Ahsoka has. If one of you guys or gals can know where that is in a canon source, let me know down in the comments, because I would love to read that. Let's make this bigger. But for the most part, couldn't find anything in canon that states the midichlorian count for each of those characters. With that said, with the knowledge that we have about midichlorians, as well as Yoda and Anakin's midichlorian count, I think we can make a pretty good guess as to how many midichlorians Ahsoka has, Plo Koon has, and Mace Windu has. So first, let's explain what midichlorians are. And I know midichlorians, again, is not everyone's jam. I actually kind of like it. But let me first explain what midichlorians are, and then I'll explain to you why I like midichlorians, why I think the use of midichlorians is kind of smart. So midichlorians were essentially these microscopic intelligent life forms that originated from the foundation of life in the center of the galaxy, from like the wellspring of the Force. And they ultimately resided in the cells of living organisms. So think back to what Yoda is telling Luke in Empire Strikes Back, right? The Force, life creates the Force, right? So it's the same concept. Living creatures, cells within living organisms are basically what midichlorians are. So they thereby formed a symbiotic relationship with their hosts. The Force spoke through midichlorians, allowing certain beings to be able to use the Force if they were sensitive enough to their powers. Those with a higher number of midichlorians, so those with a higher midichlorian count, would be able to hear the will of the Force more clearly than others. And I love, and going back to Charles Soule, another reason why I love Charles Soule so much, in his I think it's issue 3, Rise of Kylo Ren comic series, we see Luke speaking to one of his students in his Jedi Academy, and basically he's explaining midichlorians, and how he's explaining it to his student is saying, hey, in a nutshell, the higher your midichlorian count, he doesn't say it exactly like this, the higher someone's midichlorian count, think of it like a door. The higher your midichlorian count is, the more that door is open, which would then allow the Force to walk through that door, which I think is a pretty good analogy. Again, another reason why I love Charles Soule. He really writes about the Force and the Jedi, I feel so perfectly. But in The Phantom Menace, when we first learn about midichlorians, Qui-Gon tests Anakin's blood, and we learn that Anakin possessed the highest known count of midichlorians in galactic history. So in galactic history, at that point, Anakin had the highest ever midichlorian count, and it was over 20,000 midichlorians, which at that point surpassed Grand Master Yoda. The reason why I like midichlorians, and I know some people are not a fan of midichlorians. The reason why I'm a fan of midichlorians, it makes a ton of sense. Think about how hyper technological the Star Wars galaxy is. Wouldn't it make sense that in a society, in a galaxy where they've got tons of technology, the medical technology is super, super advanced, and they basically have super beings roaming around the galaxy that have telekinesis and can move things with their minds and could do all sorts of crazy things? Don't you think that someone would do some sort of tests or studies to figure out why? It makes sense to me, right? Hey, I'm going to test the blood of this Jedi and see if there's any things that I could find that would make sense as to why they're basically a super being. Oh yeah, these symbiotic beings, these symbiotic life forms living in their blood cells that people have, but not as many. That could probably be it. I think that makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense in this galaxy. When we're talking about a galaxy that's very advanced technologically speaking. So now going back to the Phantom Menace, right? We find out Anakin's got a midichlorian count over 20,000, higher than Yoda. So we don't know the exact number of midichlorians that Yoda has. Qui-Gon, or it just stated that Anakin has over 20,000, which is more than Master Yoda. I'm going to assume that Master Yoda's midichlorian count was 20,000. I'm thinking that Anakin's probably was somewhere in the realm of like 22,500 to maybe 25,000. So 22 to 25,000. I think that's probably a safe guess for Anakin, considering our boy was super strong in the Force and had a higher count than Yoda. So I'm guessing Yoda had 20,000 count. We'll say, just to make things easier for argument's sake, Anakin had 25,000. So if we use those two as a basis to then start figuring out midichlorian counts for some of those other characters, it then starts to be a little bit easier. Because when talking about Mace and how many midichlorians Mace could have, Mace Windu was essentially the second strongest Jedi in the Jedi Order, with only under Yoda before, or even I will say during Anakin's time within the Jedi Order, because probably by the time Anakin was a Jedi Knight and ready to become Darth Vader, at that point, he's probably just as strong. You can make an argument that, hey, maybe he's stronger than Mace and Yoda. He's probably right there at that point with them. He could probably go toe-to-toe. Maybe not toe-to-toe with them in a lightsaber duel, but in terms of connection to the Force and their Force powers, Anakin's right there, right? But Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Mace Windu is unquestionably number 2 in the Jedi Order in terms of actual Force powers, behind only Yoda. So if we know that Yoda's got 20, well, I should say we know. If we're going to say that Yoda's got a midichlorian count of 20,000, I think it's safe to assume that Mace has a midichlorian count somewhere between 16 to 18,000. Knowing that, again, Yoda's going to be the highest benchmark before Anakin. Mace isn't as strong as Yoda. He's going to have a little bit of a decreased midichlorian count. I would say somewhere between 16 to 18,000 is probably a good guess, and that's still very, very, very high. Most likely Mace is in a tier alone at that point, and the only person surpassing him is Yoda in terms of midichlorian count. For our boy Plo Koon, who was also an extremely strong Jedi Master and Force user, he wasn't as strong as Mace. At least we're not supposed to think that he's as strong as Mace. Where he would fall compared to Mace and some of the other Jedi Masters, that's open for debate, but I think it's safe to assume that he was not supposed to be as strong as Mace, and we're not supposed to assume that he's as strong as Mace. So based on that, for Plo Koon, I think a good range for him would be somewhere around 13 to 15,000, probably 15,000 on the highest end. I think that's a range that you would most likely find a lot of the Jedi Masters, somewhere between, or the Jedi Masters and the Jedi High Council. I should be specific. I think most of those Masters on the High Council were probably in that range between 13 to 15, 12 to 15,000 in terms of their midichlorian count. That would have made his midichlorian count, again, below Mace, but still very, very high. Some Jedi, just as a reference, like someone like Jocasta Nu, my thought would be her, because Jocasta Nu is not an extremely powerful force user. She's not an extremely powerful lightsaber duelist. She's probably going to be in the realm of like 7,500 to 10,000. Still, you know, she's still going to have more midichlorians than the everyday schmohawk in the galaxy, but she's not going to have a midichlorian count rivaling Plo Koon or Kit Fisto or some of the other Jedi Masters who were very, very strong in the Force. We're going to talk about another character in a little bit, Nadar Veb. He comes to mind because, again, I'm going to talk about him during my next question. He was Kit Fisto's apprentice. Again, probably not an extremely powerful Jedi, so I think he would probably fall in that same range as Jocasta Nu, somewhere between like 7,500 to 10,000. And then when we start getting into the Jedi Masters, that's, I think, that range of like 12 to 15. And I think Plo Koon probably falls into that 13 to 15 range, because Plo Koon was super powerful. And before anyone says in the comments or in the chat, because I could already see it, that Plo Koon can use Force Lightning or that he beat Yoda in a duel, not canon at all. The Plo Koon beating Yoda in a duel is literally a one-sentence remark in a Legends video game from like 2006. It's like a Mortal Kombat style video game where you're Jedi and you fight each other. And before your fight starts, if you pick Anakin, he makes a comment like, "Oh, I heard Plo Koon beat Yoda in a duel." Again, not even remotely canon, and even in Legends, that really was not a thing. Nevertheless, our boy is a baller. He's extremely powerful. My guess is going to be 13,000 to 15,000 for his midichlorians. For Ahsoka, although Ahsoka never became a Jedi Master, she technically never became a Jedi Knight. She's still super strong. She trained under Anakin. She showed time and time again during the Clone Wars that she wasn't as strong as Jedi Masters, but she could hold her own against people like General Grievous. Did she fight Asajj Ventress in the Clone Wars? I'm drawing a blank. I feel like they did, but I can't remember. I know she had to have. Because I'm thinking in the arc in season 5 where Ventress helps her. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head of those two dueled. But the fact remains that she was still a very powerful Force user, even though she never became a Jedi Knight nor became a Jedi Master. I think for Ahsoka, her midichlorian count, I think, would fall somewhere between 12 to 13,000. I think that she's going to be strong. She's going to have more midichlorians than most Jedi, and she could have a midichlorian count that would put her at the level of some of the Jedi Masters based on what we've seen of her in the Clone Wars, what we've seen of her in Rebels, what we saw of her in The Mandalorian. We don't see her fighting in the Book of Boba Fett, but we're going to see more of her in the Ahsoka series, which I can't wait. So I think a good estimation for her would be 12 to 13,000 for her midichlorian count. As I mentioned, each of these are guesses that I'm I'm making based on the information we have for Yoda and Anakin, and even that is not exact amounts. If any of you know of specific canon sources that state the midichlorian count of each of these individuals, let me know down in the comments, because I would love to read those if I missed them, because there's a lot of like reference books, encyclopedias for the movies that I don't have any of those. I read them from time to time, and some of that stuff I might miss. So if you have read that stuff, or if you know in canon where we could find those answers, let me know down in the comments, because I would love to read that, and I would love to know what the exact midichlorian counts for these characters are. All right. Before we move on, Sonia, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us. All right. Let's move on to our next question, which comes from our boy, Corey Carpenter. This is a fun question to answer. How many lightsabers does General Grievous have in his collection? General Grievous and his lightsaber. Our boy loves lightsabers. That's his jam, man. I love collecting Star Wars comics, novels, and toys. Our boy loves collecting lightsabers. And hey, I don't blame him. Lightsabers are dope. But let's talk about General Grievous and his lightsaber collection, and how many lightsabers our boy might have. So as with our last question, I don't believe there's a specific canon answer for how many number of lightsabers General Grievous has. While we don't know the exact number, I think we could assume that Grievous probably had a decent amount of lightsabers. He probably had a good amount. Remember, Grievous was feared by the Jedi, and he was known as a Jedi killer. You don't get that reputation. You're not feared by the Jedi if you're not a ruthless murderer, right? You're not known as a Jedi killer because you kill 1 or 2 Jedi, right? So I think based on that alone, we can assume that Grievous probably had a decent number of lightsabers in his collection, but to give the exact amount, I don't know in canon if we have that answer. We can, though, at least get an estimation of the number of lightsabers that he does have, using what we know in canon, and also using some information from Legends, because in Legends there was much more of an emphasis on letting us know what lightsabers Grievous had in his collection. So based on that, I think we could at least start to figure out a range of lightsabers that our boy would have. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, right? Grievous was feared. He was a pretty good lightsaber duelist. He was enhanced by his cybernetics to be able to kick a Jedi's ass, and that he does. And he was also trained by Dooku, who was himself one of the best lightsaber duelists of his time. So knowing that, Grievous 100% would be able to hold his own with most Jedi, and would probably be able to murk a good number of Jedi. So let's talk about the lightsabers in canon that we know he was able to acquire. So the first lightsaber that Dooku was able to acquire, another common misconception I see is people stating Dooku was given Sifo Dyas's lightsaber. Not in canon. That is not something that has happened in canon. That was something that happened in Legends. Grievous's first lightsaber was Sifo Dyas. Dooku gave him that lightsaber. In canon, kind of similar but different. Grievous's first lightsaber was given to him by Dooku. That lightsaber was not Sifo Dyas's lightsaber. It had belonged to a long dead friend of Dooku. You can infer that that means it's Sifo Dyas, but it hasn't specifically been stated that it's Sifo Dyas's lightsaber. We do see Plo Koon obtain Sifo Dyas's lightsaber in the Clone Wars. So I think that's why in canon it's only been stated it was a long dead friend, because if I remember correctly, I think Clone Wars retconned the story of Dooku giving Grievous Sifo Dyas's lightsaber. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's why. But that was his first lightsaber. So Dooku gives him his first lightsaber so that Grievous could train with him and have a lightsaber to train and use during his sparring. The first lightsaber, move this over, that Dooku acquired, or I should say the most famous, not his first, the most famous, is none other than Shakti. Grievous obtained her lightsaber during the Battle of Coruscant. There's the deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith where Grievous stabs Shakti. I don't think we know in canon how she dies. And I don't believe it's stated that Grievous obtained her lightsaber by killing her. Although you could basically surmise that, hey, if it wasn't during that point, how else did he obtain it? But yeah, he obtained it during her lightsaber during the Battle of Coruscant. So we do know that he had her lightsaber in his collection. That's probably the most famous lightsaber that he would have in his collection. He also had Jedi Master, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this master's name correctly, Jamar's lightsaber. He obtained that lightsaber after he killed the Jedi Master. And again, I don't know if it's pronounced Jamar. I think that's how you pronounce it. Jmmaar. Jamar. So after Grievous killed him, he acquired that Jedi Master's lightsaber. So that's two that we know of in his collection. In the Age of Republic, I love this comic, so good. Age of Republic Grievous issue, we see him kill a Jedi Master. Is this species called, I think they're called Mickeyans. I believe so. And he kills this Jedi Master here, takes her lightsaber. After he kills her apprentice, and takes her lightsaber. And oh, why am I drawing a blank on the planet? The Jedi Temple. We see Savage Opress go to that temple in the Clone Wars. The temple on Edith. Jedi Temple on Edith. That's where this takes place. So Grievous kills these two Jedi and takes their lightsabers. So that's two more that we know in his collection. So that's a total of three that we know definitively he had in his collection. Then in the season 1 episode of the Clone Wars, move this back a little, where we see Kid Fisto and our boy we were talking about earlier, Nadar Veb, when they go to Grievous's lair in the Clone Wars, you get to see Nadar and Kid Fisto going into basically Grievous's trophy room. All right, let's pull up that image, which we don't get to see the lightsabers, but bro, look at all these like Padawan braids that Grievous had. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Padawan braids there. So we could assume that in addition to their braids, he also probably took their lightsabers. So what would that bring our total to now? We've got Shakti's, the two Jedi from Age of the Republic, Jedi Master Jamar. That's 4. Those 8 braids that we got here. Again, I'm taking some liberties to assume he also took their lightsabers. So that's 12. That's 12 lightsabers that we could say pretty safe to assume our boy's got at least 12 lightsabers in his collection. In the same episode, it's called, is it the Grievous Lair or the Lair of Grievous? It might be called the Lair of Grievous. It's the 6th episode in the Clone Wars. In the same episode, we see Grievous kill our homeboy Nadar, pour one out for him. He takes Nadar's lightsaber. Kit Fisto is able to reclaim it though. We also see throughout the Clone Wars that Grievous takes Ahsoka's lightsaber, he takes Obi-Wan's, Anakin's, Eth Koth's lightsaber at one point, but all of them are able to get their lightsabers back. So he doesn't have them in his collection for long, but he did have them at some point. Outside of those, in the current canon, we don't know of any other lightsabers that Grievous has in his collection. If I'm missing any, there's some that you know of that are from canon, not from Legends. Let me know down in the comments who that lightsaber belonged to and where in canon that's from. Don't give me a Legends response. Got to be canon. In Legends, our boy had something like 20 to 25, possibly even more. Make this bigger. Lightsabers in his collection. And he had some pretty badass lightsabers too. So just to name a few, just some examples of his lightsabers, he had Ki-Adi-Mundi's lightsaber. And I'm going to do a video on this at some point. In Brotherhood, they talk about Grievous, Ki-Adi-Mundi encountering Grievous, which is dope. So Grievous had in Legends Ki-Adi-Mundi's lightsaber. He had Shakti's lightsaber again. Pablo Jill, who is, I can never remember the species. They're like this scary looking species. They almost look like, and I'm drawing a blank on the species name too. They're dark side force users from Legends. The Rakatans, they kind of look like Rakatans, and I'm drawing a blank, but they're not. Pablo Jill was not the same species. He wasn't a Rakatan, but he kind of looks similar. One of the ugliest looking species in all of Star Wars, Pablo Jill's species. And again, I can't remember off the top of my head what the species is called. As I mentioned earlier, Grievous had Sifo Dyas's lightsaber. Dooku gave him that lightsaber for his first lightsaber. And then he also had Darth Xana's lightsaber, Heartsbane, which I love. I think that's so dope. Darth Xana was the apprentice of Darth Bane, who eventually became the Sith Master when she killed Darth Bane. And Grievous had her lightsaber, just to name a few. So based on that, while we don't know the exact number of lightsabers that Grievous had in his collection, I think we could assume it's safe to assume at least 20. Like I said, using the Jedi that we know for sure, the lightsabers we know for sure in canon he had, and then seeing the number of Padawan braids from the Clone Wars, that brings us pretty much right to 15. Right, we're at 12, 13, was it? So we'll call it 15 at least that we can say he had. I think it's safe to assume that he probably had something like 20 to 25, maybe 30 lightsabers, right? Think about if it was known that you killed 20 to 30 Jedi. Yeah, you earn that moniker Jedi Hunter, or Jedi Killer, I should say. That moniker then becomes very, very apt, and it starts to explain why you are feared across the galaxy. So yeah, I would say something like 20 to 30 would be my guess. And again, I think it would be similar to Legends, because our boy, like I said, Legends did a better job of emphasizing the lightsabers in Grievous's collection rather than in canon. I think part of that is because you start to name lightsabers within his collection, or who owned some of those former Jedi that owned those lightsabers. You could paint yourself into a corner storyteller wise, like I was mentioning with Sifo Dyas's lightsaber. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure the Clone Wars episode where we see Plo Koon find Sifo Dyas's lightsaber, I believe that came after we learned that Grievous obtained Sifo Dyas's lightsaber from Dooku. Right, so then that becomes a retcon. And so I think that's why Lucasfilm has been a little bit hesitant to name the exact Jedi whose lightsabers Grievous had in his collection. Just my guess. Don't know if that's the case, but that would be my guess. All right, how we doing for time? about 8:46. All right, we still got some time. We got some time to talk. For our last question, I wanted to include this one just because I thought it was a little fun and goofy, at least for me, and gives you guys a chance to know a little bit more about my nerdy ass just outside of Star Wars, because I do like to do a bunch of things outside of the YouTube channel and consuming Star Wars, even though it takes up probably the vast majority of my time. Star Wars, watching Star Wars, whether it's shows or movies when they are released, reading books, comics, and doing the channel, that takes up most of my time. But there are some other things that I like to do. Love this meme, so of course I had to move this over a little bit. So of course I had to add, this is, we're talking about things I like to do, because Star Wars is going to be like one of my favorite things in the world. Star Wars, doing this YouTube channel, are two of my favorite things. But if I had to say what my favorite thing is, what my favorite hobby is, what my favorite thing to do is, not Star Wars related. It is 100% music. I love music. I listen to music literally from the moment I get up in the morning. Maybe not right when I get up, but pretty close to it. I listen to music all day long throughout work. Even during the weekends, I've got music while I'm making breakfast, music while I'm working on YouTube videos. When I am working on or doing other stuff, I'll put music on. When Danielle and I are hanging out, I'm listening to music. As I'm getting ready to go to bed, I'll put on music. I listen to music literally from like the start of my day until the end of my day. Music is probably my most favorite thing in the world to consume. I've been obsessed with music ever since I was a little kid. I don't know the exact tape. This is how old I am. My first piece of music that I owned was a cassette tape of a live Kiss performance. Could not tell you where. I don't know how I got it. It's like one of my earliest memories is having this Kiss cassette that I was listening to on a Walkman in a beach on Staten Island. I grew up in New York City. That's like one of my earliest memories. And I do not like Kiss anymore, but like that's how important, even as a little kid, music was a big part of my life. So music is going to be, if I had to choose between never being able to consume Star Wars books, comics, movie shows, or never being able to consume music, I would have to be like, yo, peace, Star Wars. I love you, but I don't love you enough where I'm watching and reading Star Wars stuff from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. Where like with music, again, I'm listening to music almost the entirety of my waking day. So music is going to be one of my favorite things. Consuming music is going to be one of my favorite things to do. Going to shows is one of my favorite things to do. I would go to shows all the time. I would travel all over, especially in the Northeast. I live in the Northeast, so I would travel all throughout the Northeast. I've gone to Chicago for shows. I've gone to a bunch of states just to see bands that I've liked. So music is a big part of my life. Shows have been a big part of my life. The pandemic sadly has thrown a monkey wrench into going to shows, but now that things are a little bit better as far as the pando goes, starting to get back into going to shows again, which has been pretty great. So yeah, music is probably going to be like number one. Star Wars, consuming Star Wars is going to be probably number two. My favorite things to do. I also love finding new music too. Sticking with music, like that's something I do constantly because I listen to so much music that I have to find new stuff to listen to on the reg. So I have to search for bands, usually through like Bandcamp. I will try to use tags to find bands. I'll search stuff on Spotify if I know there's bands that I really like. I'll try to find bands or artists that sound similar. That's something I also really enjoy to do, just because it's always super exciting when I find an album or a band I've never heard before that I get to dive into for the first time, and I really enjoy that. That's always a dope experience. Aside from music, love playing video games. I'm like, once 9 o'clock hits, which we're getting closer to 9 o'clock now on the East Coast, 9 o'clock is like my designated, all right, I don't give a shit what is going on in my life. If I'm home, it's 9 o'clock, it's video game time. I'm putting aside anything I'm working on. If Danielle and I are watching a show or hanging out, all right, it's 9 o'clock, it's video game time. That's my time to go play some video games. Usually I'm playing PvP style games. I'm a very competitive person. So I usually like to play PvP games. And in the last few years, I've been really into first person shooter PvP games. So Halo Infinite, Battlefront 2 for a while was my jam. For years, I played SWTOR, even though it's a different style of PvP. The War Zones, I think they were called in SWTOR. I did that for a very long time, like 8 years. That was my jam. After I crushed a story, I'd hop into War Zones and play some PvP in SWTOR, Star Wars: The Old Republic. I played World of Warcraft for years, and that was my same thing. I would play Battlegrounds. I think it's called Battlegrounds in WoW. I haven't played WoW in so long, but I played WoW for so freaking long. I've never, for a very long time, I really wasn't into story-driven games. They just felt kind of boring to me, just because I'd rather do something that was a little bit more challenging and more competitive. But in the last couple of years, specifically because of Fallen Order, I've gotten into more story-driven games. So Fallen Order, freaking love that game. It's so good. I recently got into Cyberpunk 2077. My brother was harping on me to play that game. I finally started playing it, and then once I started playing Cyberpunk, I saw the show on Netflix, and it was like, oh my god, this is freaking amazing. So lately, I've been splitting up, playing a little bit of Halo and playing a little bit of Cyberpunk. There's a new expansion coming out for Cyberpunk that I'm so excited for. I still haven't even gotten through all of Cyberpunk. There's so much to do in that game. And then there's going to be an expansion that I can't wait for. I can't wait for freaking Jedi Survivor. That's going to be so dope. So I love playing video games. I'm definitely a gamer. It's another one of my favorite things to do. I'm like the stuff that I'm into, I'm like ride or die. I go super hard in the paint and the stuff that I'm really into. I'm really, 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 really into baseball, specifically the Yankees. Like, I grew up playing baseball. I grew up, my entire family are Yankees fans. I'm a Yankees fan. My wife is a Yankee fan. My in-laws are all Yankees fans. So I love that. And I love that I get to enjoy the Yankees with my family, especially my younger brother, my younger brother and I are like best friends. He's a diehard Yankees fan, just like I am. So I get to talk to him all the time about the Yankees. Same thing with my wife, my in-laws. So I'm a big Yankees fan, and watching the Yankees, especially during the summer, is like one of my favorite things to do in the world. Even if it's not going to a Yankees game, just having the Yankees on at night, in the evening, during the summer. Now, my wife and I bought a house a couple of years ago. Having our front door open, got the Yankees playing, just hanging out, chilling, watching some baseball during the summer. Like, you can't beat that. I'm also a big hockey fan too. I like the New York Rangers, so I love watching the Rangers. I am a cursed New York Jets fan. I will die as a New York Jets fan, regardless of how terrible they are. It's punishment being a Jets fan. I'm cursed as a Jets fan, but I still watch them, so it's always fun to watch the Jets. I probably want my father had season tickets for the Jets for years, so I would go to a bunch of Jets games when I was younger. My wife and I have gone to Jets and Bills games, and just your boy does not do well in the cold anymore. So football games are probably going to be donezo for me, but I still enjoy football, even if the Jets are a cursed organization. I also really like reading. I love to read. I read every single night before bed. So like I was mentioning, my nightly routine is, hey, I'm getting washed up. I'm finishing shutting down my computer after playing some video games. Now let's go wash up. I'll whatever I'm listening to, even if it's something crazy, I'm putting on something a little bit more light and relaxing. Got some music going while I'm washing up. Then I get into bed, and then music goes off, and it's time to read. And I'll usually read a Star Wars novel. Is typically what I'm reading at this point. I do like to read other fiction outside of Star Wars. When I was younger, I would dabble with nonfiction. I'm just like, yo, the world is too crazy, man. I just want to I don't want to know about how awful the world is. I just want to be transported into a fictional world. So at this point, it's pretty much fiction for me is what I like to read, and pretty much almost exclusively at this point, Star Wars, because I try to stay up to date with all the canon novels, and there's just so much. There's so many freaking novels at this point. Like, it's literally hard for me to keep up with the novels. I pre-order all of them, and it's really challenging for me to read them all as they come out, even when I'm reading every single night. For years, I also really enjoyed reading poetry, and I would write poetry for a long time. I would write poetry. I have a Google Doc with something like 400, 500 pages of poetry. And the last few years, I sadly have fallen off with writing poetry, but I still really enjoy poetry and reading poetry. That's always fun to do as well. And then, like your stereotypical married nerd, I really enjoy hanging out with Danny Girl and watching Star Wars and watching the shows and movies of other fandoms and other genres that we like. It's dope. Danny Girl and I would say we don't like every single whatever. Danielle doesn't like every single show that I like, but for the most part, we like the same movies, the same shows. So it's dope. I would say 9 out of 10 shows that I'm into, 9 out of 10 shows and movies that she's into, we usually like them. And I get to enjoy those together with her, which is always super great, especially when we're watching something. And I get to watch them with our cat Chloe on our lap and our Greyhound Butters, who is adorable and amazing and a goofball. So hanging out with Danny Girl is also something that I love to do. And during the summer, we will usually camp a bunch, hike a bunch, and we've just started getting into kayaking. And we're gonna get some kayaks, our first kayaks this summer that I can't freaking wait. So that's gonna be something that we're going to be doing that I'm very, very excited about. There are other things that I'm super into and other interests that I have, but I would say those are probably my like big ones right now, my big hobbies and things that are like, all right, if you had nothing to do, did not have to worry about money, what would be your hobbies? What would be the things that you would be focusing in on right now? It would be those things. Star Wars, the YouTube channel, watching the Yankees and Rangers, hanging out with Danny Girl, reading comics and books. I forgot to mention, I read a ton of comics. And I've been lately, what I've been doing is reading comics during my lunch break at work. So I usually will read at least one comic during my break at work. So comics is another thing that I freaking love. But yeah, got a lot of hobbies and interests. I used to be even way cooler than I'm a nerd now, and I used to actually be cool back in the day. I used to do jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai for years, and one of the things I'm most proud about is becoming a blue belt in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. So hard. That was like literal blood, sweat, and tears to get that blue belt, and to this day is one of the proudest things I've ever accomplished. So sadly, because of injuries, I had to dip out of doing that. But yeah, I used to be fairly decent at jiu-jitsu, and I used to do photography a bunch, both digital and analog photography. Even used to develop my own film and make my own prints, which was fun. But those are things I haven't really spent a lot of time doing recently. So your boy, kind of an interesting guy, got a lot of things that he's interested in, a lot of different hobbies, not just Star Wars. So I thought this was a good question. I don't always get to talk about my hobbies and my interests this way. So I figured, hey, someone wants to know, you guys want to know a little bit about me? I'd be glad to share with you how much of a freaking nerd I am. All right. Like we talked about, 9 o'clock is my video game time. It's about time for me to get my video game on. I got to start killing some schlubs in Halo. I got to start taking out the competition. So, if you have not yet, please like this video. Let me know down in the comments if you think I'm an idiot for any of my hobbies or any of my interests. If there's anything that you agreed with. Like I mentioned, if there's some canon sources that you know about, talking about Grievous's lightsaber collection, the midichlorian counts, or Mace, Plo, Ahsoka that I missed, let me know in the comments, because I would love to be able to read those. Hopefully I didn't miss them. So let me know down in the comments if you know some canon stuff that I could dive into to give you guys more definitive answers in the future. If you have not yet, you frickin' jabronis, subscribe to Star Wars Transmissions. What the hell are you doing? Get on that. Subscribe to the channel. At this point, drop in shorts pretty much every day, with the Bad Batch dropping tomorrow. We got 2 episodes coming out tomorrow that I cannot wait for. I'm so excited for the Bad Batch. Danny Girl and I were going to be breaking down those episodes, and each week as those episodes release, we'll be doing our breakdowns of those episodes and sharing our thoughts on them. So definitely make sure to keep your eyes peeled for those. I've been doing the Q&As on Wednesdays. I didn't have enough time to get things together to do a Q&A this past Monday, but I think what I'm going to start doing is doing the Q&As on Monday, and then Danny Girl and I will do the live stream breakdowns for the Bad Batch on Wednesdays. If it winds up being a little challenging, maybe we'll stick to Tuesday, Wednesday. Tuesday Q&A, Wednesday for the Bad Batch. But I would say for right now, probably going to be Mondays for the Q&A and then Wednesdays for the Bad Batch breakdown. So make sure to check those out once they drop. And then I will make posts on the community section of the YouTube channel asking for questions for these Q&As. If there's any questions you guys have for me that you would like me to answer, keep your eyes peeled for those so that you could drop those questions for me and we could answer those in a future Q&A, because I absolutely love doing this Q&A. It's been so much fun, and I'm so glad that I've started doing this for y'all. But with that said, guys, it's about that time for me to get my game on. As I mentioned, I'm going to hop on some Halo Infinite. If any of you play Halo Infinite and you want to get down with some ranked Halo Infinite with me, let me know down in the comments, because I'm down to play some Halo with y'all, and we could play Halo and talk Star Wars. That'd be fun. But with that said, my friends, may the Force be with you, and stay nerdy.